Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney just destroyed the U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra for criticizing the Canadians in their behavior towards the U.S.
Twice this week, the U.S. Ambassador to Canada has been telling Canadians about his great disappointment. He has said, Pete Hoekstra has said twice that the United States had hoped for a bigger deal with Canada than just the CUSMA, than just the USMCA. He said they had hoped for a deal that encompassed critical minerals, steel, energy, nuclear, but it wasn't possible. So he said this to two audiences this week. What's your side of the story?
That bigger deal that's in the interest not just of the United States, but in the interest of the Canadian people is not on the table, but it's still possible.
When U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra publicly complained that Canadians aren't passionate about their relationship with the United States, he probably didn't expect the reaction he got. Prime Minister Mark Carney didn't just respond. He shut down Hoekstra in a way that left no doubt who's calling the shots now. His reply wasn't soft or diplomatic fluff. He made it crystal clear. Canada doesn't need approval from Washington, and it certainly isn't here to be shamed by a visiting ambassador. Hoekstra's remarks, meant to lecture Canadians, instead exposed U.S. frustration and highlighted just how out of touch Washington has become after years of trade wars, tariff threats, and political posturing.
What is the fact is that Canada and Mexico have the best actual trading relationship, trading agreements with the United States. First point. Second point is that a process is just beginning with reviews in each of our country, consultations in each of our country, of how that relationship can be improved.
Carney did more than just respond. He used it as a moment to draw a bold line under a decades-long dynamic of Canadian deference. In doing so, he exposed a deeper frustration from Washington and reasserted Canada's right to chart its own economic and political destiny. Instead of deflecting or offering diplomatic niceties, he reframed the narrative. He argued that Canada's current posture isn't about spite or emotion. It's about strategy, survival, and sovereignty. If we look at the Canadian economy, Carney has committed Canada to doubling its non-US exports over the next decade, a direct effort to reduce overdependence on the American market.
And while those consultations are going on, of course, we're having bilateral discussions with the United States, so you may see improvements along the way. We have the ambition, but a deal is a deal, and a deal has to go for both sides, and Canada will agree a deal that's in the best interest of Canadians. It should not surprise anyone, including the U.S. Ambassador, who's doing a very good job.
That's right. Canada isn't clinging to the U.S. like a needy neighbor. It's building a global network and protecting its economy on its own terms. Carney fired back by pointing to real, tangible actions. He reminded the world that Canada is actively diversifying its trade, boosting ties with the EU, Mexico, and Asia, and preparing to double non-US exports in the next decade. Now, to give everyone a peek behind the curtains, here's the actual reason why Carney had to take such a blunt tone against the US ambassador. At a recent business lunch in Halifax, Hoekstra stated that his arrival in Canada had exposed a country increasingly indifferent toward its largest and most traditional ally. He criticized what he called the anti-American rhetoric, the elbows-up campaigns, boycotts, and growing public cynicism.
The thing that was probably the most unexpected, and we're going to get right into the meat of the stuff that we want to talk about today, okay? I'm disappointed that I came to Canada, a Canada that it is very, very difficult to find Canadians who are passionate about the American-Canadian relationship, okay? You ran a campaign where, it was anti-American. elbows up, Me Too. You know, it was an anti-American campaign. That has continued. That's disappointing.
According to him, Canadians seem uninterested, even resentful of their long history of trade, security, and cultural ties with the U.S. That wasn't simply a criticism of policy. It came off as harsh judgment of Canadian identity. For many in Canada, especially after recent tariff battles and economic friction, it felt less like diplomacy and more like an attempt to guilt-trip a sovereign nation into submission. That's why the reaction was swift, from business leaders to everyday citizens. As one Canadian trace sector representative bluntly put it, when you kick a dog, you can't blame him for snarling back.
Me Too. You know, it was an anti-American campaign. That has continued. That's disappointing. I talked to a lot of business people. They are passionate about the relationship because they recognize rebuilding ecosystems and rebuilding the kind of economic relationships that we have.
Hoekstra may have tried to guilt-trip Canada, but Carney flipped the script. He made it clear that Canada's decisions, from standing firm against U.S. tariffs to expanding trade deals abroad, are about strategy, sovereignty, and long-term growth, not emotions or passion points. Carney isn't reacting, he's leading.
As some people talk about, we'll go other places. It's kind of like, that's hard.
And the best part? This is a wake-up call for the U.S. Hoekstra's old-school condescending tone looks laughable against a Canada that's confident, capable, and unapologetically independent. Carney's message is loud and clear. Canada charts its own course, defends its interests, and earns global respect.
Plus, this one works pretty well. We've created a lot of prosperity and wealth, high quality, high paying jobs by working together on both sides of the border. Like I said, I'm passionate for it. The business community is passionate for it, but they're not very public about it.
Hoekstra's disappointment backfired spectacularly. What he meant as a critique became a public showcase of Canadian strength, resilience, and diplomatic finesse. Carney didn't just respond. He humiliated the arrogance behind Hoekstra's comments and reminded the world that this isn't Canadian weakness. This is an American defeat. The message couldn't be clearer. Canada is no longer a follower. It's a force to be reckoned with, and Carney is leading the charge. Carney's message was bold, his posture unflinching, and his ambition unmistakable. Canada will chart its own sovereign course. In doing so, he rattled the room and challenged the old assumptions that have underpinned Canada's foreign and domestic policy for decades.